to the Bitcoin Consciousness podcast. Today I have the guest, the Bitcoin poet here. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
So I've seen your writings. I read your blog. I read your tweets. And I'm curious to ask, how did you end up being involved with Bitcoin and poetry and higher consciousness?
Well, that's a good question. It all started for me back in 2003, I guess. That's when I sort of woke up to what you might call the corruption of the fiat paradigm and the whole conspiracy thing paradigm. I was also doing a lot of yoga at that time because it was the start of my self-empowerment journey also. But I didn't really get into Bitcoin more than many years later because I didn't realize what Bitcoin was a solution to anything at that point. But what I did instead was to use Bitcoin to buy cannabis on the dark web. That was the only use I had for Bitcoin for many years, when I was into all that. But that's like 10 years ago now or more, or something like that. But I wrote poetry when I was a young student. That was back at that time, 2003 and whatnot. And I was all into poetry. I was basically sleeping with poetry books in my bed and notebooks and whatnot. I was all into that, and I was living like a bohemian lifestyle with a lot of drinking and, sitting around in pubs and all that, until I got the more of an awakening, which I realized that meditation can actually give you the same clarity and pleasure that you get from the inspiration that you get when you write poetry. So that sort of changed my whole trajectory and whole outlook on things. And I stopped writing poetry at that point, which was around 2004, maybe 5. I completely stopped writing poetry. I never wrote again. I went into meditation and the whole self-empowerment thing instead. But then when COVID hit many years later, like a couple of years ago, I had a lot of time on my hands. So I decided to sort of check if I still had it in me to write poetry. So I made a Twitter account, called myself the Bitcoin poet because I was into Bitcoin and I was, wanted to learn more about Bitcoin also. Even though I was already into Bitcoin because of a friend, I wanted to learn the fundamentals even more. So I went into the Bitcoin Twitter corner and followed a lot of Bitcoin maxis. And my angle and my contribution to everything would be like having a poetic angle or a aesthetic angle to it. So it started like kind of like I didn't know if how much I was gonna write or anything. If I was gonna make even one poem, I was pretty happy, to even do that. But then it went easier than I thought. I had it in me still, so I started writing more and more. And then I had this one hit poem, which was the Surfer Gym, which was made into a song the day after I wrote it, basically, and became like a big viral thing. So it sort of encouraged me to continue. And now I've written, I guess, around 16 Bitcoin poems. And I also have an agreement with a publisher to actually publish them later this year, maybe in a book. I can't go into details about that, but I have I'm working with a publisher for actually publishing the Bitcoin poems. I don't know if that answers your question or you want some more details about something, but yeah, that's the backstory of it.
Yeah, very interesting. So you said there that you had this period when you didn't see much point in the poetry. It was like you used that poetry to access your intuitive mind, and then when you got access to it, you sort of left the tool that got you there. Because in some of your tweets, you're saying some poets, they try to structure the poem in a way that you sort of interrupt the rational processes of the reader, and they are able to get a glimpse of the intuitive understanding behind it.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, sure. That's an insight that came to me much later in life. I just wrote the poetry early in life when I was a young student. I enjoyed the sense of inspiration you get and the clarity you get in that state when you write, the inspired state. But later I realized that what the poet is actually doing is sort of imprinting that inspired state into the poetry, and that you can transfer the aesthetic value of that sense of that clarity through time and space, like Bitcoin does with monetary value with the poem. So the reader, the receiver of the poem, can get a sort of a same taste of that aesthetic experience, as I call it, which is basically a disruption of the linear processing mind. So you get a glimpse of what's behind that, which is more of a pure awareness instead of logic and rational thinking. That's the idea about, and I even wrote like a poem about that, and I have some tweets about it. Yes, I write more about that in my book, in my foreword to the poetry book I'm going to publish. I'm going to go into more detail about all that.
Yeah. And have you thought about any other ways? So you mentioned Bitcoin is doing the same, and poetry. Have you thought of other ways that people are trying to achieve the same disruption of their linear structure?
Yes. What happened to me was that when I discovered meditation, it's sort of because for me poetry and these things and art was sort of tied together with a self-destructive, suffering artist myth. So I was living that myth kind of. So when I discovered meditation, I found a cleaner way of accessing the same. So I didn't have to live self-destructively and write poetry to access it. I could just sit down and close my eyes and meditate. I could get a sense of the same and a much more, almost on demand, and also on whenever I wanted. And I didn't need to sort of do something and create something to get that sense, which appealed to me a lot back then, obviously, because I was not very high level. I was quite struggling in many ways. So I pursued that instead. And obviously meditation and debugging your own node, as I call it, or debugging your mind, is the way to eventually permanently actually get access to a much more fundamental state of being than being at the whim of your coming and going emotions and the rational mind and the irrational emotions and all that. You're basically going deeper by debugging your own node or mind. If you take it all the way back, then you can find peace, inner peace in that sense. You don't only get a glimpse of it, you actually get as a permanent state of being.
Yeah, great. And I want to bring up the topic of confusion here also, because I think it's connected with the destruction of the rational linear thinking. So this confusion, when we live in a busy, stressful environment, we need to do things, we need to get things done, we need to provide value, we need to earn money, then confusion is like an enemy. But when we look at it from this perspective that you're talking about here, that actually we want to disrupt the linear thinking because we want to go deeper into what really is, rather than being stuck in the illusionary conceptual mind. So this confusion from this perspective is really a good thing, because it's like, oh, I'm feeling confused. And then it could be a gut response trying to get out of that confusion or to push it away. But if we're going more towards a meditation technique, then we can sort of embrace that confusion and we let those structures crash, because we know that a bigger understanding will emerge on the other side.
Yeah, totally. And you have to be willing to face the confusion, because it's going to be a lot of that, especially in the beginning. For me, when I started my meditation, it was like, it's so much stuff is buried in your unconscious mind, and it comes up all at once in the beginning because you have an overload kind of. And that's a lot of confusion, and that scares people away from the whole path, because you feel like you're opening Pandora's box and you don't know if this is going to be like this forever. People don't, because nobody teaches this in school. So nobody understands. So that most people just shy away from it. They don't want to go there because they want to keep a lid on it instead, like you say, and they don't want the confusion. But you have to be willing to face a lot of confusion and pain, which comes up, and it's it's going to get better after a while. But in the beginning, when you open the Pandora's box, as I call it, then it can be a lot to face. But it will be better after that, and it will become more manageable in more manageable packages, so to speak. But it will be a continuous process as long as you allow it. But if you put a lid on it again, you stagnate. So you have to take it all away, and it can be a lifelong project. You can't see, like, you can't get inner peace in 2 years, or most likely. It has to be a long-term thing, just like hodling Bitcoin. You have to have a long-term perspective.
Yeah, and I think that some people who are more of a linear thinkers, they might even get confused when listening to a conversation like this, because we will discuss more like intuitive concepts which might disturb the linear thinking. Or what do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like a different paradigm, and if you have no experience with that paradigm, you can be scared of it. You can not understand it. You can judge it in so many ways. You have to have some kind of taste of it and experience with it, but you have to verify that for yourself. You can't really be told. You can be told about it and read about it, but it's not enough to really understand. You have to have proof of concept, which is not that hard to get. You just have to, do one. If you face one inner thing that comes up and it leaves you, for good because you faced it, and that's gone, then you have proof of concept. It worked, and you can just continue doing that for as long as it takes until you clean the whole garbage can.
Yes. So you have been also writing about nodes, and this is something that I've been having visions about also. So seeing the human soul or spirit, or whatever you want to call it, and then making parallels with the Bitcoin network and the nodes. How did you start looking at things from this reference point?
Well, as a poet, I have this natural ability to sort of see connections in nature and in life, in many things and different things. And the more I studied Bitcoin, which I didn't know too much about before, actually, I went all into Bitcoin with my money before I knew too much about it. I knew it was the best way to invest, but I didn't really know the fundamentals. But as I studied it by listening and reading books about it from the Maxis in the Twitter community, more and more I saw the connection to how the network of Bitcoin can be looked at as the network of humanity, and each individual is like a node in the network, right? And spirituality, these things, and they can be too airy-fairy and weird for many people, but everybody understands debugging your own node. Well, by node I mean mind, obviously. So that became like a thing for me, and it's also, I'm writing a book about this now because I believe there's enough there to actually have a book which can actually orange pill spiritual people and red pill Bitcoin people at the same time. So you sort of mix together the self-empowerment, debugging your own node with Bitcoin from that perspective, which is what I'm trying to do in this book I'm writing.
Yes, and that's a similar path as mine. I'm also sort of trying to bridge the spiritual concepts with the Bitcoin concepts, and talking to both of these kind of communities and trying to learn and understand more. And what I really like with the Bitcoin community is this: they have this decentralization, which is very strong, and it's like individual sovereignty. But while in the spiritual camps, they're not so much about this. They are more like peace and love, and everybody believes in the same God, and they are sort of more drawn to centralized ideologies because they want to more agree, and they want to have this harmony which is harmony when you don't stand for yourself and who you are, but more about belonging.
Yeah.
Have you?
I
Have
can
you?
totally relate. Yeah, I've seen that. I've been in different spiritual communities in my life, and especially that it's a new age thing. I was never into the new age thing at all, because for me, it has to be verifiable and it has to be grounded in something real. And with spirituality, even the name spirituality, you can so easily get into abstractions and just lose yourself in a cloud of abstractions that are never really grounded, which I never wanted to do. And my book is going to be also all about, exercise, so you can actually verify everything I talk about, or the main concepts. So this is really important for me. The spiritual journey has to be grounded in something you actually can verify for yourself, which goes to all the Bitcoin ethos of verification, and also decentralization, because you don't believe in one authority to hand you the truth. You have to verify it for yourself, which is what I believe it will be the future of spirituality, because airy-fairiness and weirdness and new age weirdness is not going to appeal to the masses, and especially not to people like in the Bitcoin community, because they need to verify.
Yeah, I think it's this kind of weakness about believing in concepts without verifying that the Bitcoiners cannot accept. And the deeper I go into the Bitcoin community, I really dig their attitude.
Me too. What really appealed to me with the Bitcoin people, was that they have such a strong drive to truth.
Mm-hmm.
They're relentless. They want the truth, but they still have this. Most of them they see Bitcoin as a solution, like from the outside in. What I'm appealing to, or trying to explain in my book and my tweets, is that really the solution is not only Bitcoin. You also have to debug your own mind. That is the primary cause. Bitcoin, or the fiat paradigm, is the primary manifestation of the problem. It's not the primary cause. The primary cause is the majority of nodes, basically voting for the system that they have already now. If you want to upgrade it, you have to upgrade a certain amount of nodes to a different paradigm, and then they can spread it to the rest of the nodes in the humanity network. That's the idea I saw, the vision I had.
Yeah, I'm with you there, because we talk now about the sort of the weaknesses with the spirituality people and why we are drawn to the Bitcoin people. And then when we are in the Bitcoin community, we can start to look at what weaknesses do we have here. And I resonate with what you say, that they are kind of outside in orientated. So they look at the problems and they search for truth, but they don't see the connection sometimes with their reference points.
Yeah, and with they see the solution coming from the outside, and Bitcoin is a major solution, and I believe Bitcoin will go hand in hand with, or hyper-Bitcoinization will go hand in hand with the spiritual renaissance, or the self-empowerment renaissance that we're already in, and it's going to be a major thing in this decade. I believe it's going to be a big world movement, but that renaissance is going to need physical sound money, but it's also going to need people to actually be able to debug their own node and mind, because that's how it actually, that's the deepest revolution, the most radical thing you can do. But Bitcoin is going to be a big part of it, I believe, and the Bitcoin community is going to grow, and it's going to be needed people who can explain the spiritual or self-empowerment paradigm combining with Bitcoin, and how those two relate, which is what me and you are basically doing at this time, kind of ahead of our time a little bit.
Yes, because if we talk about the linear structures of the rational mind, and we talked about how to break through them and to see how things really are with our intuitive mind, then if you think of that as long as we identify with the rational mind and the concept within the rational mind, we are not able to see ourselves from an external reference point. So we are not able to see ourselves from our intuitive mind. You can't see our programming from outside ourselves, as long as we identify with the programming.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like you need to have a gap between you as an observer and what goes on in your mind, what comes up, and what comes and goes as content in your mind. That's the first crucial step for me, at least. It was on the self-empowerment journey, was to make that separation very clearly. Because if you don't have that, you automatically run by whatever comes into your mind, because you don't see any of it. You just act it out and talk it out, and automatically there is no self-awareness of it. So when you meditate and you sit down and do that, all you have to do is get that realization that you are, as an observer of what comes up in your mind, you are responsible for acting out something that is good, and maybe rejecting or let something else go that's not so good, instead of just automatically take the first thing that comes into your mind and act it out. That's your responsibility. No matter what other people do and say, you have a responsibility to actually look at your own mind and respond in a conscious way, right?
Yeah, so if we go back to this node concept, where would you say is the node then? Is it external observer, like
I wouldn't call it. I wouldn't call it it's more like an internal observer than external, but it's more like an objective, or more objective than. But the node for me is the whole individual. Basically, you have to debug yourself, and yourself is your mind. And then when you debug that all the way back to pure awareness, you're basically enlightened. You're a fully debugged node. But that can be a lifetime project, But and if you haven't been exposed to a fully debugged node or enlightened teacher, you have no concept of what that even means, right? I don't know if you have, but I have been with several in this in my life.
Yes, I have also. And
yeah, that helps, right? That helps you to understand that there is actually possible to be completely debugged and free in that sense, and have that level of being is possible. It's hard to see that if you haven't been exposed to it.
Yeah. So you say like the whole thing is the node. So could we say that our node even is decentralized internally? Because then you have the physical body, you have the rational mind, you have the spirit body, you have the emotional body. You have all of these different things in your node. And then is it a central authority to all of these things, or they are like working together, decentralized? What's your feeling about that?
I think we can simplify it a little bit more. We have two things. You have pure awareness, and then you have layers of mind or programming or conditioning or negativity or whatever in front of that pure awareness. And the pure awareness is projected through those layers, and that becomes the life you attract around you and see around you. And so you have pure awareness, and you can use awareness to debug yourself by establishing that gap between your observer mind or the observer and the mind stuff. And then when you become conscious of negativity in yourself, you watch and observe that negativity until it plays out and leaves you, because that's all that's needed. You only need to observe it neutrally and basically not judge it, just allow it to play out the momentum, and then it's gone. And then you have purified a little bit of your bugs and removed some negativity. Then you just repeat that process until all the bugs are basically gone, if you manage to take it that far. That's how I see it.
Yeah. Could you give us a little bit more of a step-by-step methodical, like how do you do it? When you see a program, how do you deal with it, and how is it processed, and how does it leave your system? Can you do this?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing you have to do if you go on that journey, on the self-empowerment journey or debugging journey, you have to sit down and meditate formally, close your eyes and whatnot, until you realize what I talked about before, that you are, as an observer, separate from whatever emotions or thoughts or whatever comes up in your mind. You're a separate entity from that. And those are not your thoughts, those are not your emotions, those are just stuff that comes up from programming and conditioning. And when you have realized that, you can basically be in that observer mode all waking hours. So then the mind, which basically is self-cleansing, if you allow it to be, but most people keep a lid on it. They don't want to go there, like we talked about before. So you have to just allow that process to continue throughout the day. And if you're triggered by things and, what people do and say, that's an opportunity to allow those triggers to play out. And you just have to be able to observe those triggers and whatnot in your mind in a neutral state, and not judge it and not act it out and not repress it. Just allow it to be there until it's basically the momentum of the energy plays itself out, and then it's gone. And when it's gone for good. It doesn't come back. It's left you, or it's basically burnt away.
What happens if we can't help ourselves and we act it out anyway? What happens then?
That's going to happen obviously a lot. Nobody's perfect. You can't. That's going to happen a lot. You just have to be not be hard on yourself if you make these kind of fall back to that. That's normal. That's completely understandable. Most people don't, do anything like that. They just act out anything like unconsciously. So you are doing a great job just by being aware of this. Anyway, but what happens is that then you have to face the consequences of your actions, which might be severe. If you act out jealousy and you hurt somebody severely because you're jealous, then you have to face the consequences of that action. But if you just play the jealousy out, allow it to play out in your full awareness, and basically forgive, because you're burning away the jealousy by forgiving, by observing it neutrally until it's gone, then you have escaped that karma. You don't act it out, you don't get the karma back to you, right? So you're basically saving yourself a lot of grief by doing this.
Okay, so we talked about being attached to beliefs about ourselves, about the world, and as long as we identify with them, we think they are true, and they are like filters put on ourselves. And what about other people, attachment to other people, and other people trying to control us in any way in relation to us as nodes on the network?
Yeah, so basically when you, as a node in a network, deviate from what is the consensus, which you have to do if you go on a spiritual or self-empowerment journey, you will have to do that. The other nodes will sort of fight it, and that includes your friends and family. They don't do it consciously. It's just their negativity in them that they haven't taken responsibility for and debugged, that is trying to hold you back, kind of. So, the network wants to have a consensus, just like Bitcoin wants to have a consensus truth, right? But Bitcoin is not corrupted, and like humanity's network is severely corrupted and has been for a long time. So it's, we don't have the purity of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin network. But definitely the other nodes will try to hold you back, will try to drag you down to their level again. So it's a difficult struggle, or a difficult school or journey to significantly escape the consensus reality, like you do when you go on that path.
Yeah, sometimes I see it as, we have an active node or we have a deactive node. And if we are listening too much to what other people say and think, so we're sort of living up to other people's expectations, then we are bypassing our node, and we're just living sort of the expectations of other nodes. So we live in this vacuum where we don't have contact with our own node. So when we activate our node, we start to take actions from inside ourselves. So we feel inspired to do something, not because we want to please someone or so, but we feel like, this is why I'm here on earth, this is my purpose, and I should do this. Can you relate to that?
Definitely, yes. It's very much like that, and because the unconscious nodes just run on the program they have, been indoctrinated with. They don't really know exactly what they're doing. They just run automatically, and you have to find back to something true in you, and that can only be done by starting the debugging process, by detaching from the content or the programming that runs in your mind constantly. You have to become aware of your own mind. If you're not aware of your own mind, you can't be aware of the bugginess of it, or the dysfunction and the conditioning in the programs. that's the first step. And when you do that, then you can start to debug it. And that will remove you from most other nodes, which might mean that you will lose friends and get alienated from family even, which is the case for for me and many people I know who have gone through the same. You have to be. That's what it means to become individualized. You have to be able to stand on your own. You can't rely on consensus realities or other people's expectations, as you say. And society and other people have, and especially parents, have expectations towards you since you're a little kid, and those things make imprint on you all your life. And especially if you have a dominating parents who want you to be this and that in life, right? So, like many people do. You have to break free from all that to become who you actually are. And that can be rough, but many people don't do it. They just succumb to it, and they become somebody they're not really supposed to be, or shouldn't have been if they actually went on the path of becoming authentic.
Yeah, very well explained. And what happens then when we activate our node? It becomes like a little light. We connect with the creation network. We become part of the creation. We become co-creators. And then as we do this, like I call sometimes random acts of intuition instead of random acts of kindness. So when we come in contact with our node, we get these kind of inspirations, intuitions, and like, oh, I should do this, even if it doesn't make sense to our linear mind. So we start doing these kind of random things. It can seem to linear people, but for us, it just feels right. And it could be that you do a few of those random things, and then one day you see, oh, because I did this, and now I have this amazing opportunity, or I meet this person or something like that. So it's a different operating system, because it's not like working, now I'm here, I should go there, and you block out everything else. Instead, you do the opposite. Like, I don't know where I'm going. I just know that I want to be true to myself. And this is what I feel like doing. And you start doing these random things. And when you see it's working, like the non-linear operating system is working, then your node become even more strong, and it starts to vibrate even more.
Yeah, I totally I agree. And for me, even from a young age, it was really important for me to, I acted on what you might call my highest excitement. I didn't act on the expectations on what my parents wanted me to do. I took an education that, most people will look at as kind of useless. I studied philosophy and literature and these things because that's what's my highest excitement. So I staked my whole life on that would work. From a very low level, I was insecure, young student, and I had no idea what will happen, but I just knew I had to study these things, literature and these things, because that was who I am. And obviously my parents weren't too happy about it, because what job are you going to get with that, right? But I mean, it turned out pretty well for me. So because there is this life formula that many people talk about, which is called acting on your highest excitement, and that's what I did intuitively from a young age. I felt I had no choice. I couldn't sell out and just just take an education, because then I can get a good job and live a life, and then you die. I needed to find answers, and I needed to act on what felt true to me, and that took me for a long journey, which just keeps on going, and taking very unexpected turns, as you say. You don't really know exactly why you do these things, but it feels right. So you just act on that in that direction, and suddenly it takes you to a new adventure you had no idea was even possible.
Yeah, and I think that because this is such a different operating system, so people with passive nodes, people who have not activated their nodes, and they live to fulfill their dreams and fulfill other people's expectations. This is what I call outside in. So they are not in contact with their own node, but they are living on the expectations and imaginations of other people around them. And this is just such a difficult thing to explain without people experiencing it. Have you found any way to explain to a outside in person how it is to live in an inside out operating system?
Well, I've tried many ways, but my book is definitely going to explain that. It's going to go into that, as a main topic of the book I'm writing now. So that's going to be, a way to explain it. But it's difficult, as you say, because as you can lead the horse to water, but you can't force them to drink. It's the same principle, right? You can't force the red pill into people's mouth. You can just offer it, and many people are not ready to do that, because it's really scary to act out of all norms of society and go in a direction that's your mind, your programming is screaming that this is crazy, but deep inside it is right. But that knowingness, that only grows when you act on it. The more you act on it, the more it grows, the more you have proof of concept, and the more secure you become in that. And pretty soon, or after a while, it becomes how you live. That's the difference. But you need, as you say, it's a different operation system. You receive guidance from a higher intelligence. You can't really explain that to people, but it's the same intelligence that basically creates your dreams, because in your dream you're experiencing yourself as you do in physical life, but somebody or some intelligence is creating that dream. All that stuff that happens to you in the dream is created, and many times it has a message for you. That must mean that whoever creates the dream has a higher intelligence than you and more oversight than you, right? So it's the same intelligence that you are actually in connection with when you create art and poems, and it's the same guiding intelligence, a higher self, as they call it.
Sometimes I say it's like the level of intelligence that created our human bodies, or even more our energy bodies. Like, it's so immensely complex how the body works, right?
It's like it's the sort of your full self, I guess, who focuses you into this physical reality, which you're basically just a finger on, and that's the whole hand, kind of, or I don't know, describe it, but it's definitely a higher intelligence that is responsible for where intuition comes from in these things. I mean, intuition is basically knowingness for no reason. Like, there is no linear logic behind, you just know something, and that's intuition. And many inventions have come from that. And the more you debug, the more access you have to intuition, and it becomes your guiding mechanism in life, because you don't need too much rationality and linear thinking anymore. You just follow your intuition in small and as big things and decisions.
Yeah. So the last few months here, I've sort of opened up on my podcast here and in articles about the blueprint reality, about the frequency world or the spiritual world, and how we're able to tap into that and look at it with our senses. What's your experience with the world of frequencies and how they can be perceived from a human hands?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, the so-called physical reality is basically just frequencies. I mean, it's matter. Matter is 99.99% emptiness, right? So there's very little matter in matter. It's basically vibrating frequencies. So everything is frequencies, right? That's how I see it. And also different people have different frequencies, which depends on the level of debuggedness. You might call it that. If you have a lot of bugs, you have a certain frequency. If you have cleansed your system a lot, then you have a different frequency. A heavy drug addict, if you be in the presence of a heavy drug addict, you can sense a very low, negative frequency in that presence. But if you're in the presence of an enlightened teacher, it's the opposite. It's a very high and loving presence. That's basically boils down to frequencies. So your level of debuggedness is tied directly to your frequency as a person. But most people haven't experienced a big discrepancy. They have only experienced regular people which all have more or less the same frequency, right? So unless you have been exposed to somebody who is either a lot higher than you or a lot lower than you in frequency, you don't really know about such things consciously that much. But it also is what makes certain people vibe together and, you know, have a connection, and other people don't. It's all about these frequencies that are not really visible to unless you actually become more conscious and energy sensitive.
So people with similar frequency are sort of drawn together because they relate to life at a similar way. I mean, they are in the same frequency length. So
yeah, wavelength, or, you know, bandwidth, or, you know, paradigm, basically. That's how it works as far as I see it. And that's why you gravitate towards the strata of life or reality that your own frequency is, you know, if you have a lot of problems, you would be gravitating towards being a drug addict with other drug addicts. If you have, you know, if you have cleansed yourself a lot, you will be gravitate towards other people of similar natures and who wants to debug themselves also, like spiritual communities. It's a natural process like that.
Could you even say that, like in America, they have like Democrats and Republicans? Is this like two different frequencies, or what do you?
Yeah, it has become a lot like that, especially after Trump came into the picture. He basically almost split reality in two by his polarizing way of being. But the Democrats and leftist people, it's not really about ideology as much as it is about frequency and level of debuggedness. Because these people, leftists and the Democrats, they're stuck or caught up in victim mentality and victim consciousness at the lower end of the frequency scale. And that's why the leftist ideology is sort of appealing to people in a victim consciousness, because they identify with other victims so they can feel better about themselves. You know, they identify with all sorts of minorities. They claim to be victims so they can feel good because they are helping the so-called victims, while they are actually the victims themselves. But the Republicans are more like self-reliant people. They have a higher frequency of individualism, and I'm not saying they're perfect. They're just saying that it's a very different frequency. Definitely. The Republicans are much more individualized, and they have more in self-empowerment than, in general at least, than the Democrats at this point. It didn't used to be like that many years ago, but it all has changed.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Have you had any thoughts about frequency categories and Bitcoiners?
Bitcoiners are, you know, mostly, many of them are into the conspiracy paradigm. They've woken up to it because they went into the Bitcoin economy, fiat rabbit hole. And most of them are really, you know, individualists. They want to be, they're kind of like Republicans in a way, not quite, but they have a high frequency in comparison to they have more optimism about the future, and they have more of a purpose in life and Bitcoin has given them this foundation in life because they have something to stand on. They feel like they have something they can build a future on, and for their kids, you know. So definitely Bitcoin has been a major influence on that, and it's transforming people's lives, which is what really appealed to me when I realized this, that wow, this Bitcoin is like, you know, really changing people. People are getting incentivized to better themselves and, you know, create a future for themselves because they now have something to stand on, a rock solid foundation. And I see Bitcoiners as, you know, they're truth moxies. They just don't yet know how to direct the truth search inwards. But that will come, I think, in this decade. In the coming years, you will see a major renaissance in that sense.
Yeah, because when they see truth, it's like they say that when people become Bitcoiners, you don't see them leave Bitcoin because it's more of a realization, more of an intuitive truth rather than a concept to hold on to, right? And when they come into this realm of intuition, they slowly start unraveling what I call the personal fiat system. because we as Bitcoiners, we look at the world, we look at the Fed and there's central banks, and then we see Bitcoin as this truth coming in and crashing everything. And then in ourselves, we have this, our true self, this truth of ourself is coming into our life, while everything we thought was true, this fiat system is just crumbling because of the power of our personal Bitcoin coming into the picture. And as Bitcoiners and start to see the mirror between the external reality and internal reality, it can lead to a mass enlightenment event. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I totally. I more or less, wrote a poem about these things, and it's definitely the case, because I had this vision about Bitcoin being like the monolith in Kubrick's 2001 Space Odyssey. It's like this enigmatic thing placed in our midst, and suddenly it's there, and we are just like the monkeys jumping up and down trying to figure it out with FOMO and FUD, right? That's what I wrote a poem about, and I also made a meme about it. But anyway, the Bitcoin is kind of like a reflection, because the self, the true self beyond or beneath all the programming is absolute, right? And Bitcoin represents or reflects something absolute back to us. It's an absolute truth. It's an absoluteness to it that is the same as the innermost self, or the true self, which is beyond the programming. So that's the connection, I believe, and that's the symbol Bitcoin is, and that's how it works, and it disrupts everything in reality, all the programming, all the nonsense, just by existing. And it helps people to unravel all the lies, and eventually they will actually start to look inside more. For the time being, the lies that is unraveled is the fiat paradigm conspiracy lies of the world. But eventually it will also drag along with it all the programming inside people. That's when debugging their own node will become the big next thing, I believe.
It's very interesting to see. This is the first time we talk. We just had small exchanges online, but I started my journey around 2000, 2001, and you said you started around 2003, and it's a long time, and
yeah,
we never met, and then we come together and we see things very similarly, don't you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's interesting. It's very interesting. But that's how, frequency, they drag people together who have similar views, similar ideas about stuff, right? So definitely interesting to get the confirmation that, at least one other person is, seeing these things also, like you do, and but I think many more will follow in the coming years.
All right, now actually I'm writing an article, because I see this. I see it like that when people pursue Bitcoin, they indirectly pursue themselves. So I see this wave of Bitcoiners coming to wanting or needing answers on a spiritual level in the coming years. So as preparation for this, I'm writing an article about non-physical entities, non-physical beings. So I'm sort of collecting all the information, all the experiences I had the last 20 years to sort of give any Bitcoiners who start seeing things, and they become maybe afraid that they are getting crazy or something like that. So I'm trying to make it quite easily and not so scary if this happens, right? Because as I see it, as long as we have a busy life, we don't really see it. But when things calm down around us, then we can start to do this debugging, as you call it. It starts to happen in this kind of sphere of imagination, and then our imagination can speed up the debugging process, but it can also be a scary experience. Do you have any experiences or words of advice for anyone who starts seeing any beings or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's scary enough to face your own pain at first. That's, you know, most people are avoiding to do because there's a lot of it lodged in the unconscious mind. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of, you know, being born into a very corrupted network like humanity is. So that can be scary enough, but when you have proof of concept, you've done it a few times, then it's not so scary anymore. But definitely there are beings. I'm not sure if you should go too deeply into that, but there are beings, in my experience, that feed upon negativity. You know, they're called archons in some contexts, and they are there to kind of like bacteria. You know, bacteria breaks down dead material and whatnot. It's like they're energetic beings who feed upon negativity and friction, which this is the friction between your true self and all the programming and negativity you have that the true self is projected through, creates a lot of friction, which is negativity. And that excess energy of negativity has to go somewhere, has to be broken down. And that's these archon beings. And you can verify this if you get angry about something, or you have something that somebody wronged you, and it keeps returning to you. This being wronged keeps coming back to you. And you can actually, if you're a little bit sensitive and conscious, you can actually sense there's something in your heart area that is sort of, you know, feeding upon that, or there's something going on there. I've seen this in myself. I've even have intuitive visions, seeing it in other people, and I believe there is like I write about this actually. I'm gonna, in my articles and also in my book, I'm gonna go into this. But it can be quite scary for you know, for people who don't have any experience with this. But they can't really do anything because they're like trolls or vampires. They die, or they explode or you know, die in the presence of your awareness. They can only exist in the shadow of your being, or you know, in the unconscious. They cannot really do anything except feed upon your negativity, and you can easily you know, get rid of them by being conscious of whatever goes on instead of avoiding it. And then they just have no choice. It's like darkness versus light. They represent darkness in a spiritual sense, while your awareness represents the light, and these darkness cannot tolerate light. So it's the same thing in a metaphorical way, kind of.
Yeah, and all of these things can be sort of, we can create scary concepts around them, or we can create hopeful concepts around it, because they are things are, and then we use our imagination, we come up with concepts to explain what is. And some people want to explain it in a way that is scary, but it does not need to be scary. And so, like you said, in the end, it's just like, it's a symbol of your own darkness, or your own shadow. And also,
yeah, exactly.
So you don't see it as some small demons running around you. You know, it's
no, that's how you can, you know, Christians or, you know, religious people who are deeply into that, they might interpret it very religiously and scary like that, because they see it as demons, which you definitely can't do, right? But as you say, it's a good idea to not do that, because they're not really scary when you know that it's like having a nightmare, you're being chased. But if you turn around and place your awareness on whoever is chasing you, that whoever is just shrinks away and is gone, right? It's the same with these beings. They're only scary because you allow them to be that, because you don't have the willingness to just turn and face them, you know, with your full awareness. That they cannot tolerate. They cannot live in the light of awareness. So if you know that, then you're not that scared of. But if you don't know it, it can be scary. But you will know that if you have actually, you know, done it one time is enough to see how they just evaporate in the light of awareness.
Yeah, and it's bringing us back to these two different operating systems. While with a deactivated node, we tend to run away from problems. We tend to distract ourselves rather than facing our challenges. And then when we grow up, when we activate our node, we find our inner strength. And it's natural for us to look at things, to face things. And that's when things like this, if it's some beings that show themselves to us as negative or scary, we are in this facing mode already. So if it's something that seems scary, we just look at it, like you say, and then it's not scary anymore. It's just this, if we are scared of it and we try to look away, then we will keep being afraid of it because we don't want to face it. But when we face it, it's not scary anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the first time that's the most scary for people, because these beings will try to keep you in the current paradigm. That's their job, basically, to keep people, they're the adversary. They want to keep you, their job is to keep you in the current paradigm. And your job, so to speak, is to transcend that, right? And the very first time for me was when I faced off against this being the first time, which was in the beginning of my journey. Then it was super scary, because they make it scary. They insert thoughts into your thought stream that's, make it seem like crazy what you're doing. They make it seem like you're going crazy maybe too, because you get a chaos of thoughts. But then you just have to power through it. And then when you've done it one time, you have proof of concept, it's not so scary anymore. And two times, and then basically it's the breakthrough point, the first time, that is really holding people back. But when you have done it the first time, you have come a long way from, you'll never be scared again in that sense.
And it's like standing up in our own node, right? It's like, this is me. And you just face this, and you just see it for what it is. And it's just an illusion. It's just like a projection of our own worst fear, right? Because they play on our fears.
I mean, that's what I mean in my book, by becoming anti-fragile, which Bitcoin is. They talk about Bitcoin being anti-fragile. It's the same with these beings, and the whole system is there to expose your weaknesses. And if you just use it as that, okay, here is a weakness, here is something I have to look at. They exposed it, they make it look scary, you faced it, you debugged it, and it's, you're stronger. You actually they're actually helping you. They're actually serving you in that sense. It just looks scary in the beginning. But when you start to use them as, what they're supposed to be used as, namely to point out your weaknesses and blind spots, then you can use them all the time all the way to debug yourself. So it's actually serving you in that sense. You just have to change your context and how you see it.
Yeah, change the context and how you see it. Yeah. And that's also because what I call it like the imagination layer or the imagination interface, because we know that beyond time and space, it's just frequencies, right? So whatever shape or whatever we see, it's sort of our imagination interpreting the frequencies behind it. So when we come into our node a little bit more, we can actually choose how to interact with this imagination interface. So if something is scary, we can just switch to perceive it as frequencies instead. And then it's just frequencies. And
you're out of alignment. I mean, when you're scared, you're basically out of alignment, which you always are unless you have completely debugged your node. You're always kind of out of alignment with your true self, your natural self, your free, pure awareness self. You're out of alignment because you have all these resistances and corruption and negativity in your unconscious, which your pure awareness, your natural self is being projected through. That creates fear. And, it's a self-correction mechanism in which when you have removed all the things that are out of alignment, then you have no more fear. So it's basically, because it's gone so far out of alignment for so many people for so long time, it's a hard job to turn around that ship and, change course. But, you have to do that job at some point. So you might as well start now, right? Because, you're just building up more negativity if you don't. So the sooner you become conscious and start to do the inner work, the easier or better your life will become in the future, and not only in this life but also future lives, if you want to go there.
Yeah, and it's, to some extent, it's not necessary to do everything yourself also. I mean, my job now is to help people to do this, is to activate their know, to face their fears. But some parts of the journey, everybody needs to do on their own. So I don't know, have you ever helped anyone with their debugging of their knowledge?
Yeah, definitely. People can get help, but in the end, I mean, you yourself are responsible for it. But definitely, I had a lot of help myself, not least from fully debugged nodes or enlightened people, because their energy is so strong. When they put their attention on you, that sort of blasts away many bugs just by doing that, and that is something that's known more in the East and in India and these places, but not so much in the West. But you have enlightened people and teachers also in the West that are available, or even on Skype and whatnot. But I mean, I've helped. The more debugged you become, the more natural it becomes to sort of help people, and in different ways. I haven't had it as a job, but I definitely have helped people in my life in different ways, but I'm also trying to help by writing the book, because for now, a lot of people just have to become aware that these things are even possible, and that, these things are even real, that there is such a thing as debugging your own node and, these inner work things. A lot of people are not even aware that that's even a possibility. So that's a big step, but I believe in the coming years, there will be a lot of teachers available, and there will be like a big revolution and renaissance in which this will become the new big thing, mainstream thing that almost everybody is into.
Yeah, because it's really like changing your blueprint, right? So rather than waiting for the illnesses to come and then to find a doctor that gives you something that tries to cure the symptom, you go directly to the blueprint. I mean, it seems more effective.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the blueprint is basically it's lodged in your unconscious mind. That's the whole blueprint is there for your whole life, and it's projected onto your life, and that's the reflection you get back, both in terms of how you feel about yourself and also what you attract as things happening in your life. Because everything that happens, or you at least, things that happen in your life, is there to reflect back to you some kind of bug or things that you have to look at in your internal system, in your blueprint. So if you're not happy in life, you have to change the blueprint. You can't, force the reflection in the mirror to smile. You have to actually smile first, and then the reflection will smile back, right? You have to change the blueprint level. And that's what most people don't think. Everybody wants to change the world. Nobody wants to change the blueprint in themselves, because that's hard work. That means you have to face inner pain and negativity and fear. But that's going to change, and it is changing right now, and it's going to be changing in a major way, I believe, in the coming years.
Well said. So we will have to look out for your book when it comes out.
Yeah.
I will add your Twitter ID in the description, and we will keep in touch. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. It was great fun.